The upscale restaurant was shrouded in shadows, not just from the flickering lights, but from the palpable tension hanging in the air. I, a mere waitress, listened intently to murmurs that snaked through the tables, stirring my own unease. The vampires, with their hissing voices, mocked an unexpected visitor, the king's wife. The moment her heavy-set figure entered, a tense silence fell. There was something ritualistic about their taunts, as if each word was a dagger piercing her dignity. The vampires chuckled, hiding their claws beneath their composure, but their mouths betrayed their disdain. "Your light is a burden. This city sings of your sorrow," one of them provoked amidst poisonously sweet laughter. My blood boiled, the roots of suffering echoing within the walls of that filthy place. Every light comes at a cost. A mantra that had always resonated in my darkest moments echoed in my mind. Through a mirror on the wall, I watched the desperation in the woman's eyes as she tried to maintain her composure among the monsters surrounding her. The vampires reveled in the spectacle, their laughter forming a chain of contempt. For some reason, I couldn't tear my gaze away. It was as if her suffering chained me. Deep down, a part of me wished to scream, to protest, but my reality silenced the voice of indignation. With a discreet touch, I gave a signal, hopeful that someone was attentive to my silent plea. If only the prince were nearby, perhaps he would notice. Yet, instead of leaving, I stood firm. My fingers moved in subtle gestures as I kept my eyes fixed on the scene. A flash of determination ignited within me, the chains of fear breaking before the urge to act. But then, a vampire's presence drew near. His penetrating gaze analyzed my every move, as if deciphering a riddle. The tension of the moment felt cutting. What was he looking for? What was he about to discover? A sense of urgency surged through my body. I silently pleaded with something beyond myself that he wouldn't notice the rising heat in my blood. And for a brief instant, I saw the future unfold before me, a vivid image floating in my mind. What would happen if nothing was done? What would become of the king's wife's dignity while the vampires continued to revel in her misfortune? No, it was unacceptable. I needed to know how I could protect this woman who, in essence, reflected all the lights dimming around me. The brooding darkness over the table was a spectre I could no longer ignore. A new resolve burned in my heart. The next move had to be carefully calculated, each step an odyssey toward a new destiny. With a newfound determination pulsing in my soul, I decided that the fight for dignity would begin tonight. The surrounding shadows would no longer be the only shroud covering the city. I would break the silence with light, no matter the cost. Memories began to flow like a river of pain as the sound of vampiric laughter reverberated in my mind. The scene distorted, and I was transported back to childhood, where scornful glances and pointing fingers weighed heavier than any physical punishment. In the darkness of my memory, the wounds were deep-seated, an eternal reminder that purity was venerated, and anything that didn't fit that mold was relegated to oblivion. Discrimination had always followed me, a ghost dancing around me, whispering that I wasn't worthy, that my complexion was a stain on the perfect tapestry of vampire nobility. I saw myself as the girl who often peeked through the cracks of life, invisible to the world's eyes. The pain of childhood grew within me, a root taking hold in my chest. In the court's halls, those who should have been my protectors were the invaders who stripped away my dignity. As the king's wife struggled to maintain her composure under the taunts, I realized her fragility echoed what I had always endured. A fierce impulse pulsed in my heart. These vampires were the same ones who reveled in my despair, and now they convinced me that the struggling woman was a joke in their cruel play. A spark of protection awoke in me, and I knew I had to do something. A flame of determination grew within me, burning against the fog of oppression. The thought of the king's wife's ring haunted me. That artifact, more than a status symbol, was a focal point of power. If I could access it, perhaps I could use it as a link between worlds, human and vampiric. The laughter continued, but in my mind, a plan began to form. However, a shadow stretched over my plan. A faction member watched me with suspicion, his eyes like sharp blades. What did he know? Doubt seemed to hang between us. I needed to act cautiously. Moving forward without a proper plan could be catastrophic, not just for me, but for the king's wife, and by extension, for my own quest for dignity. I relived moments when I protected those around me, the innocents who would suffer due to greater forces. In each memory, the urgency intensified. This push from the past was the driving force that guided me. If those vampires were parasites, what could I do to purge them? The line between what is ethical and what is necessary grew increasingly blurred. I needed to form discreet alliances, to discover who else in the city might be willing to fight by my side. The shadows were gathering, and every step I could take had to be a step toward the light. Humans were also more than just victims. They were hidden allies, and their stories were more important than they could imagine. I looked at the table, where the king's wife still tried to maintain her dignity. A new determination burned in my heart. Her honor and my own would find a way to the surface, and thus the battle for dignity would begin. There was power in weaknesses, and together we would be an unbeatable force. The mocking laughter resonated, but in truth, it was the echo of a future I was determined to shape. The game had begun, and I was ready to make my final move. The restaurant doors slammed shut, and the mocking atmosphere dissipated around me. Inside the hot kitchen, the pressure transformed into a spark of an idea. My heart pounded as I focused on what truly mattered, doing something significant. The vampires saw humans as mere puppets, but what if we could turn the tables? There, in that stuffy space, I found old Alaric, a cook of many secrets and raw stories. "You know this is dangerous?" He cast a cautious look around. His eyes reflected not just fear, but wisdom etched from years of oppression. He also knew how oppression suffocated hopes. "We need to join forces," I said, as an idea began to take shape in my mind. "The vampires don't expect us, the despised, to unite and form a resistance." The boiling of my determination seemed to infect the atmosphere, attracting other kitchen staff, eager for change. "A small group can do more than a disorganized crowd," I argued, encouraging them to share their stories. Each employee had their grievances and secrets, and as revelations began, I realized many felt oppressed by the same yoke. The vampire's shadows had been a dividing line between us, but now, together, we could face those forces. I knew we would need deeper information about the court and its intersection with the humans who served it. The king's wife's ring was still on my mind, and this became a clear message. The nobility's oppression also affected vampires, and that could be our advantage. After deliberating, the idea of reaching out to the king's wife grew stronger. If we could win her over and expose the court's hypocrisy, we could strike the first blow. Light could conquer that darkness, and I was determined to be the blade of that attack. I said goodbye to Alaric and the others with a sense of urgency. Time was against us, and the vampires were on alert. We needed to act before they received any warning. With their support, we began to weave our silent web. The plan unfolded: build alliances, gather information, and prepare the ground for confrontation. Walking through the streets at night, my determination grew. The city whispered old echoes of suffering, but now it was a call to resistance. In the fight for dignity, we discovered strength in weaknesses and unity in our fears. The game had begun, and I was no longer a mere witness. I was a player willing to challenge the very essence of oppression. With each step, the battle for dignity unfolded before me, and I was willing to be the light that would illuminate the path in the darkness. The shadows fell, Night cast its dense shadows through the city's narrow streets, and as I moved, the biting cold mingled with the fire of my determination. The plan to gather allies pressed with every step, and I knew that a false move could mean our ruin. However, now a spark of hope burned in my chest, an impulse guiding me like a flame in the darkness. In the weeks that followed, the resistance began to take shape. Secret meetings became routine, hidden in alleyways and dark corners where whispers of revolt and convergence filled the heavy air. Alaric had become a pillar of wisdom, teaching us how to operate in the shadows, collecting valuable information about the nobility's roots and the vampire's movements. He had a way of transforming my thoughts into strategies that were both subtle and bold. In one of these meetings, a name emerged among us. Lysander, a man who worked in the court as a messenger. He had access to secrets few dared to dream of knowing. I was seized by the urgency of convincing Lysander to join our cause. An ally within the court itself could be the key to our victory. With each encounter and planning session, the tension mounted. I knew the clock was against us. The faction member who had observed me at the previous event began to glimpse the forming resistance, and my few interactions with him made it clear that surveillance on me was intensifying. It was a dangerous game, and we were rapidly moving into a labyrinth of intrigue, where every step could mean discovery, but also betrayal. One night, turning a corner, I spotted a familiar figure. It was Lysander. With the weight of his choices etched on his face, he hesitated before approaching. The fear was palpable, but there was also determination in his eyes. What could force him to take such a risk? "I've heard rumors," he said, keeping his voice low. "You're starting to cause unrest in the court, but it's too risky." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. "We need your help. If you join us, we can expose the hypocrisy that reigns in the court." A few words set the tone of our conversation. I strengthened my arguments with the stories of the oppressed, not just humans, but even vampires living under the nobility's yoke. There was a fire in my conviction that seemed to shine in his eyes. "If I'm caught," he whispered, "it could mean my death." The entire risk was clear and evident, but the need for an ally within the court was more intense than my fear. Death is already among us. We need to fight for a life that has value. Finally, after long moments that felt like an eternity, he nodded. "I'll help. But we need to be careful." Thus, a new chapter opened in our battle. The meetings became more frequent, and with Lysander by our side, the court's secrets slowly began to leak. Revelations about the plots involving the king's wife, her oppression, and, most importantly, the true power of that ring, a connection to ancient blood pacts. Each new piece of information was a powerful tool toward our ultimate goal, but it also sounded alarms within the vampire faction. The tension electrified the air around us, and confrontation seemed inevitable. We were on the verge of a major move, and the tide of history was beginning to turn. Lysander's revelations heightened the tension in our resistance. With each secret meeting, reality became slippery ground. I suspected we were being watched, and the atmosphere carried a somber premonition. The hunters, once distant, seemed to gain courage. Rumors of our unity spread like wildfire. One dawn, crossing a dark alley, I saw a group of hunters. They moved like shadows, watchful of our growth. "We're in danger," I whispered to Lysander, who was beside me. Our hasty breaths echoed against the stone walls. He looked around, his face reflecting the urgency of the situation. "We need to separate. If we're caught together, it'll be the end," I suggested, adrenaline coursing through my body. Fear and determination intertwined. We split up, each taking a different path to throw off the hunters. Walking in the gloom, I realized that the city, once a refuge, had become a battleground. The feeling of being followed left me uneasy. I managed to escape to an abandoned warehouse where I found temporary refuge. The darkness inside sheltered my despair. The air was heavy, and each beat of my heart echoed like a war drum. Reality was revealing itself, and more I questioned if the fight for dignity was worth it. When I finally reunited with Lysander, he was visibly shaken. "They're monitoring us. The situation is more delicate than we thought," he said, his voice tense. But the urgency of our mission pressed on. "We need to deliver a decisive blow to the court. The king's wife needs to hear our voice," I declared, an idea growing in my mind. The plan became clear. We needed an act that would not only grab attention, but expose the hidden truths. Gather all members of the resistance, expose the vampire's vulnerabilities, and make the nobility realize we were no longer shadows in their lives. With each passing second, the fight for dignity became clearer, and a new flame of determination ignited within me. The battle that could decide our destinies was approaching, and the tension mounted like a storm about to break. The resistance was no longer just a choice. It was an essence, born from weaknesses and hopes. Like a blade, we were about to strike a blow that would shape our future. The game had changed, and our fight for freedom was beginning to transform into something that could no longer be contained. The tide of history was about to turn. The decision was made, and like lightning cutting through the darkness, urgency pulsed within me. The shadows of the hunters still lurked, but we had a mission, an act that would break the chains of oppression. The souls of the resistance began to gather under the faint light of lanterns, a clandestine assembly in a hidden alley, where the murmur of our plans echoed on the cold walls. As Lysander relayed the collected information, I felt the tension rise. "The king's wife has been isolated, surrounded by spies," he said, adjusting his voice to prevent any sound from echoing in the streets. "If we can capture her attention, we can expose the hypocrisy behind the court's curtains." The desire to act grew with each word. It had to be clear that this was a moment for courage. We detailed each step of the strategy. We would have to make contact with someone within the Queen's closest circle. The resistance was ablaze, and each member was a spark. The outlined plan became bolder. We would make a public declaration that would attract the nobility's attention. The idea of a bold encounter where we would demand justice before the court was on the table. When night fell, we walked anonymously toward the palace. The air was charged, and each heartbeat to the rhythm of anticipation. The guards, usually observant, seemed restless. A change in the air, the fear of revolt. As we approached the gates, a group of hunters appeared, like dancing shadows amidst the dim light. Time had run out. "We need to be quick," I whispered. "If they catch us, we'll be lost." We instructed the members to disperse and follow separate routes. A bold strike would be our foundation. The surprise factor could turn the tide of the situation. Destiny was at stake, and the line between success and failure was thin. The plan was in motion. The first move was a cry, letting the words rise into the air like a wave as everyone gathered in an open space. "For dignity! For justice!" I shouted, allowing desperation to transform into a fervent cry. Others' voices joined mine, forming an echo that reverberated in the night's silence, cutting through the mist of uncertainty. Confusion quickly set in among the guards. They didn't expect to see the resistance gathered in one place. A commotion spread. The act of courage was underway, and from the shadows emerged other voices, solidifying the flame of our fight. The Queen, isolated, would feel the weight of the outcry, like a storm about to break. At the height of the panic, Lysander made his move, not as a messenger, but as the spokesperson for a wave of change. A cry of hope cut through the confusion, and the nobility was about to understand that chains could be broken. It was time to shock the system, to show that we were ready to fight. But in this fragile balance, a shadow moved in the darkness. Those who manipulated the court would perceive the rebellion, and amidst the clamor for justice, a new challenge arose. In the darkness surrounding our movement, the fight for dignity would become a power play, and the consequences of our actions would reveal themselves in an explosive instant. What was about to happen could define the fate of us all. The battle had just begun. The clamor for dignity turned into a fury against the palace walls. As the voices of the resistance rose in a unified protest, tension filled the air. The Queen, surrounded by her entourage, felt the weight of the revolt approaching. The guards, stunned by the audacity of the resistance, exchanged doubtful glances, unable to process the real threat to the established order. In a decisive move, one of the hunters, a man with a fierce gaze, noticed our concentration. "Capture them!" he shouted, and a sense of urgency spread like wildfire. "Disperse!" I yelled, but the crowd remained, united in the strength of their determination. At the center of the tumult, a new cry of courage resonated. I saw Lysander fighting a guard, and adrenaline made my heart pound. The fight was not just physical, but symbolic. We were determined to confront oppression and rekindle the flames of revolution. The battle erupted in all its fury. As members of the resistance defended and attacked with bravery, determined glances crossed amidst the chaos. I moved with agility, immersed in the frantic dance of conflict. Ilara, by my side, wielded her sword with skill. "We'll show them we're not mere shadows," she shouted. And the burning courage in those words warmed our spirits. At the climax of the battle, I spotted the Queen approaching, her expression a mix of perplexity and defiant curiosity. "Why do you rebel?" Her voice cut through the noise as her eyes scanned the scene. "You could bring about your own ruin." "We're tired of living in fear," I shouted, anger and urgency echoing in my words. To my surprise, the Queen hesitated. The fervor of the protest seemed to break invisible barriers. "Now!" Lysander exclaimed, a clear vision amidst the rising panic. We needed to rally the Queen's power before the hunters surrounded her. She could be the key or the arbiter of our struggle. With a surge of determination, I advanced toward the Queen, the voices of the resistance still resonating around me. "Queen, we fight for freedom, for a future without chains," I cried. The confusion dissipated slightly around us, and the moment her gaze met mine, I felt the tension float between us. The battle, now a whirlwind of courage and risk, unfolded in the desperate search for dignity. The fate of the resistance, and even future generations, was in her hands. In that instant, the possibility of change hung in the air as the tide of history threatened to turn and tragedies could culminate in triumphs. I stepped into the uncertainty with each move, knowing that the outcome of our actions could not only define our present, but reshape the destinies between vampires and humans. The fight had only just begun. What would unfold then could very well change the face of our reality, leading us, finally, to a future where dignity was not a cry, but a lived experience. The battle for freedom was underway. The tension was palpable as glances crossed, each seeking an answer and understanding. The Queen, her face reflecting a mixture of defiance and curiosity, seemed to weigh the consequences of our rebellion. The clash of battle around us faded to a distant murmur, almost secondary in the presence of that majestic figure. "You speak of freedom," the Queen began, her voice resonating with a hidden power. "But what do you truly desire? Destruction or equality?" There was something in her eyes that made me hesitate. She was not just a sovereign, but a woman on the brink of a monumental choice. The fate of many depended on that decision. We desire a future where everyone can live without chains, where hunger doesn't define who you are. My voice emerged full of courage, mixed with the desperation accumulated over the years. It was a truth that had been consuming me. Vampires and humans should not be rivals, but allies in a common fight against oppression. Lysander also approached, bowing slightly in respect. The queen needs to decide if she will be part of the resistance or remain with a failing system. His words, rather than sounding like a challenge, now seemed like a powerful plea. The crowd around us, a dynamic and vibrant mix of humanity and vampirism, waited for any sign. The queen looked at the warriors facing the hunters, and for a moment the universe seemed suspended. The echo of the conflict still resonated in our bodies, but now we had something stronger, hope solidified as a tangible entity. Destiny was narrowing to a crucial point. She took a deep breath, and what could be a turn of the tide was about to present itself. "If I turn against the court, I could lose everything," she said, and for an instant fear was laid bare, but determination began to form on her face. "On the other hand, you have shown me that living under fear is the true ruin." The tension between resistance and oppression was high, her words resonating like a ray of hope amidst the darkness. Suddenly, a cry cut through the atmosphere. The hunters advanced, fearless and determined. Panic began to spread, but the queen, with a firm gesture, raised her hand. "If you are willing to fight, I will fight too. Together we can change this city forever." The outcry echoed once more through our hearts. That phrase served as a sign of unity. Without hesitation, I turned to the resistance, adrenaline surging. "Let's fight! Freedom is within our grasp." The words came out like a powerful incantation. With the queen by our side, the battle intensified. The resistance transformed into an army of hope, the fear of the hunters dissipating. The fight finally represented something greater. Our blows were more than battle weariness, they were the beats of a new future. The struggle became fierce. With each movement we built a bond between vampires and humans, movements that would transcend who we were and shape us for the history we wanted to write. The echo of the battle still resonated, but now it was an anthem of change, a symphony where everyone could play their part. As the battle unfolded, the possibility of unity was within our reach. The tide of oppression seemed to finally bend, allowing dreams of equality, dignity, and freedom to begin to blossom. A new dawn awaited, and we were ready to embrace what would come. The path would be difficult, but with the queen by our side, we could finally walk together toward the horizon we so desired.